with some amazing speakers. So I'll speak two examples. Is Volko Runke, the mastermind behind GMT's Great Coin series. He gave a fantastic lecture on how to design a coin game. I highly recommend it. All of our webinars are recorded on our YouTube page, so you can check them out. And on the bottom picture is Yuna Wong, who's discussing Hegemony, which is Rand's first commercial game, available game, which will be coming out later this summer. And that was a fantastic webinar about design thinking and how that went into that game. And then we do game nights. So you can see some of the games that we run. On the top photo, you see Axis and Allies, and two of my colleagues trying to help students walk through Axis and Allies for the first time. In the far back, on the top photo, you see Rising Sun, actually, which is a great game. And then the bottom, you see in the back Memoir 44 going on on the back end, and in the front end, you see Game of Thrones Risk, which is a fantastic game. I highly recommend it. I call it my gateway game to get people who are not familiar with gaming into wargaming, and I want to provide a special thanks to all of our commercial donations who donate to our gaming library. They've been so supportive, and we have benefited immensely from it. And we hope to be back on campus and running these social game nights again. So what is on the horizon? We have lots of cool things on the horizon. We have Marine Corps Wargaming Labs, Wargaming Division's game called Assassin's Mace, which is about modern day conflict at the operational level between China and the US. And that is called Assassin's Mace, and we'll be running that in the spring, COVID permitting. We are in the fall running a crisis matrix game called Flashpoint Politics in collaboration with the Army War College, conducted over, I believe, Zoom or Blackboard. We haven't decided yet. We are working with several wargaming organizations to establish wargaming fellowships virtually to allow young wargamers to gain more experience, and for wargaming institutions to create more like entry-level experiential jobs. We have amazing webinar speakers like Mitch Reed, who is a senior wargamer at the U.S. Air Force, leading their Title 10 game series. We have Mike Linick from the RAND Corporation. We have Ed McGrady discussing pandemic gaming, which is so poignant at the time. We have John Compton talking about analytical gaming. So we have a fantastic lineup, and I encourage people to go sign up for those. And COVID permitting, Georgetown will be fielding its first competitive wargaming team for the Marine Corps University Wargaming Tournament, hosted by Jim Lacey down at Quantico. And then I will put up this, which is my email, and then for Georgetown, our Goose website and our Goose channel. And I will take questions. Grant?
I'm back. I'm sorry.
White Rook says, is there a published resource guide for all these webinars and resources such as Google Drive and inter-organizational wargaming? You can find those on our Google Drive. So if you sign up for our newsletter through guwargaming.org, which is on the screen, you can sign up for our newsletter for free, and you will get access to our Google Drive automatically. So go for that. And all of our webinars are posted under our Goose events, and we try to post as many non-Goose events as possible under the associated tab. Other questions?
Hey, Sebastian, I'm back. I'm sorry. I had a complete internet dropout here at the house. Thanks, AT&T. So I'm glad we're recording this, that we can give it to everybody intact after the fact. One other source I wanted to throw out there, just, again, a little bit of self-promotion here. Over at armchairdragoons.com, we do have our forum area where we have lots of folks, mostly commercial and hobby wargamers, but some of the pros pop in here and there to talk about a variety of wargame stuff. And we do have a forum dedicated, a section of our forum dedicated to professional wargaming. It's a lot of sharing of other folks' articles and a little bit of discussion around things. But we have folks that read pretty far afield, and so you will find a lot of different things get shared in there. So that's another place you can pop in. And it seems that everybody has to make the mandatory recommendation of you should be reading PAX Sims as well.
Yes, I agree. So I assigned some of the design discussion articles on Armchair Dragoons to my students in the fall, like how do you do movement? And I think it's a fantastic resource. So Kate asks, how does learning how to design a war game make you a better player, or vice versa? What's the correlation between the two? I'm sure Brand and other war gamers will have opinions on this, but for me, I think being a designer doesn't necessarily make you a better player. I know many designers who get beat at their own game. Like literally, they're the one who design it and they still lose, and they're not good at their game sometimes, or good gamers. But then you see other designers who are great at gaming. But I don't think there's always a correlation in terms of being a great designer and being a great player. But in terms of being being a commercial game player, or game player in general, as a hobbyist, and being a great designer, I think there is some correlation there because, as I was talking with Jason Matthews yesterday, as you play more games, even if you're not good at them, the more you play, you are building that repertoire of skills and references into your Brazen Housing group as a designer, right? For instance, as you play more games, you figure out how other games do movement, how they deal with the information horizon, how they deal with risk, how they create competition or confusion, or there's an elegant solution to something, right? So, for example, one of the things I always love in a game that I always think about in terms of game design, and have never been able to use in any of my game designs yet, is the feature in Panzer Guderian, which is an old school game, I believe by SPI, where the combat factor of your counters, you don't know until you flip them over in combat. And I found that so fascinating, because it was supposed to replicate the notion of like, you didn't know if your unit, that division on the board, was fresh recruits or veterans, how well they would fight. And I think that's so realistic and so interesting. The untried unit factor, yes. So I believe that's really important. That the more games you play, the more things you add to your experience. It's like reading books for author, and adding more techniques and ideas to your artistic toolbox as a designer. So did I miss any? Okay, so what are other questions?
So Enrico's got one in there that is a pretty fascinating question, and I think I have a good analog comparison to add to it as well. He said, I've heard that aside from wargaming interest, it's better to have a complementary skill to build the wargaming framework upon, such as operational research, etc. If I don't have a specialized skill or competency, is it still possible to disseminate wargaming as an educational tool? Rex Brynan is a big proponent of this, where he likes to tell his students, you need to be an analyst who understands how to wargame, not a wargamer who happens to do other things. And I think the analog from the wider industry out there is journalism. There are a lot of magazines and newspapers that aren't just looking for folks that came out of a J school with a journalism degree. They want to know what subject matter do you actually understand, and we can make you a better writer. So don't just come to me with a journalism degree and nothing else. Come to me with an economics degree and a minor in journalism, and we'll make you a better writer, but we can't teach you how to understand economics as a journalist in the newsroom. So that's one kind of an analog. What have you seen there, Sebastian?
So, as I tell my students, is that very few jobs will have you do wargaming 24/7 every day of the week. I was fortunate to do one of those jobs at Quantico, where I worked for like a dedicated wargaming shop, where all I did was wargaming. Other places now, like for example at RAN, I do wargaming maybe 60-50% of the time, compared to other more traditional research projects. But overall, I tell my students about the same thing, in the sense of like, be a diverse wargamer / analyst, right? Is that wargaming and wargame design is a tool in your toolbox that you enhance with other things, right? For example, when I first got hired to be a wargamer, I was designed for scenario design. I was a writer. I was actually writing for Foreign Policy magazine, with no J degree, by the way. And the thing they were saying, hey, you have a military background, you know how to write, you understand how the Marine Corps works, write scenarios for war games. I was like, sure, I didn't even know wargaming was a thing. And then I learned wargaming, and then I'm also constantly learning new skills. Like I am learning new graphic design skills. I am learning OR, which is not a field that I traditionally exist in. I'm more of a qualitative guy than a quant guy. But I think as a wargamer, as one thing is true as an analyst and wargamer is that you always constantly evolve and absorb new skills. One of the things I tell my students is that to be intellectually omnivores, right, is that consume everything, right? Consume articles about art in the New Yorker, consume things about foreign policy, consume things about education and theory, consume YouTube videos. Like, for example, one of the best places I get ideas for my class is a YouTube channel called Extra History. Okay? It's fantastic. I love like historical channels on YouTube, and I devour them. Audiobooks, like consume as much information as possible. And then the hard part is, as an analyst and as a designer, is to be able to apply that knowledge selectively and with wisdom in the right context. Are there any other questions?
I don't think we've got any specific questions. We are getting pretty close to the top of the hour. If anybody's got one they're madly typing, throw it in there. If not, just, you mentioned the untried unit thing from Panzergruppe Guderian. One of the things I always found a little wonky about that one is that a lot of the units that were going into battle in PGG weren't brand new units. These were units that had a little bit of combat underneath them and should have had a bit of a reputation established with them. I always thought the untried unit factor worked a lot better in the Modern Battles 2 quad that SPI published in the late 70s because 3 of the 4 games in there were featuring units that had not actually fought in battles lately. So when you're fighting the North German plane there in Bundeswehr, and you've got the Germans and the Brits against the Red Horde, they were actually sort of a muddy brown horde with the counter color. You didn't know how those units were going to actually fight in a real battle because they hadn't fought in one in 35 years at that point. So I thought it was a really good mechanic for the more modern hypothetical games than they were for like a World War II game using units that had already been in combat.
Yeah, so absolutely. So that's a great example of a game mechanic being fantastic on its own and not being quite perfect for the game it was built for. And I think that there's lots of times I encounter games I'm like, oh, this mechanic's really cool, but it's really odd in this game. But there are times that the game mechanic's just perfect and it only works for the game that it was designed for. The way it works in terms of elegance and how it's used. In the last remaining minutes of my session, I'm gonna take advantage of the fact that one of my students is in the class and ask her to unmute herself. Sawyer.
Yes. Hi.
Hey Sawyer. We talked about tactical decision games. Can you elaborate on your experience with tactical decision games in the class?
Yes, and I put a little bit of this in the chat because I think in my last presentation right before this one, I was talking about how tactical decision games were the hardest part of the course for me. And I think that it's partly a joke, but also I did find them incredibly challenging, but I also found them incredibly valuable. And I think that tactical decision games are a really good example of games that are meant to educate the decision maker. I instantly could see in the fact that they were challenging for me that if I continued to practice them, I would become better at understanding tactical situations, making decisions under pressure, considering factors that I had never been forced to consider before in an academic setting because I'm not a military practitioner, right? I'm not in fatigues. I never get asked what next lieutenant. I'm a civilian. So being able to get that kind of training felt like sharpening a part of my brain that was atrophied if never accessed before. And I thought that was really intimidating and valuable, but another good example of, as you called it, Sebastian, intellectual cannibalism, right? Or not cannibalism, intellectual omnivorism, I think is what you said. But yeah, it's a good example of that, drawing inspiration from all kinds of places, and it's a good example of, I guess, the difference between educational games and analytical games as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If I remember correctly, you guys use a graphic novel too for your game, right? On Three Kingdoms.
Yeah, we did. We found a graphic novel, sort of like a comic version history of Three Kingdoms. We also watched Chinese TV series dramas of the period. because the Three Kingdoms period, maybe we lucked out on this, but it's incredibly popular in Chinese pop culture. So we used Georgetown's library and we just dug up whatever we could. I also found a massive coffee table book of pictures of artifacts from the period, which is partly why I got the abacus idea for the game, so that we could try to move the points with an abacus. I think that's really the fun part, right? Is digging through both the mechanical research and the historical research and just grabbing stuff from everywhere. And for me too, I actually spent a lot of time, I should have talked about this in my last presentation, but I spent a lot of time on Board Game Geeks and just going through. I would search by mechanic, and then if I found a game that sounded like it might apply, I would go to YouTube and watch a tutorial video, and then I would take notes, and I came to my team the next day with by mechanic, or by element of the game that we were trying to put into the game, 3 or 4 mechanics and different board games that they were represented in, and then we went through each of them and talked about what might work and what might not work from those. So there are lots of different things that we tried from all kinds of places, and it was really fun to do that.
Yeah, so from Sawyer's description, you can tell how much work this class is. But I won't ask Sawyer if this class was worth it, because I'm not sure if my heart is prepared for that answer. But I think it is worth it in the end, Sawyer. I think it is very hard.
You couldn't hear me laughing because I was on mute, but it was totally worth it. I mean, I'm in the wargaming, analytical wargaming field now full time, so you did something right.
So I'll end our presentation on this one funny story that involves Sawyer. Is that before Georgetown let me teach a full semester course on this class on the basics of wargaming, they asked me to do 2 sessions each of so I would do a lecture series and a game section over 2 weeks on a Sunday in the fall and the spring semester. And I believe it was the spring semester that Sawyer came to one of my sessions. And she's like, I don't know anything about wargaming, but I think I'm sort of interested. I want to do something that involves analysis and sort of I'm a really creative person. I was like, you came to the right thing. This is exactly what wargaming is. Welcome, and we're never gonna let you leave now. And look at her now. And it's been a year and a half now. It's quite the journey for you.
Yeah, it's cool. Once I got introduced, there is no escape.
Yes. And I was like, here are all the readings for the class. So I will end our session here now, unless there's any last-minute burning questions. And just thank you, everyone, for engaging, and thank you for coming out to talk with us about Georgetown.
Thanks, everyone.